Great. Well, thank you, Heather, and welcome everybody. I'm really happy that a lot of you, I think, are joining me for your lunch hour. So I'm really honored at that. And let's get going. So boundaries in the workplace. My name is Sabina Weil. I'm a clinical mental health counselor, and that is the number to call the Blomquist Hale office to schedule with us, to ask questions, et cetera, et cetera. I want to go over some of the benefits first for all of you who are here, who have the EAP benefits. So Blomquist Hale is an awesome company. I'm really honored to be working with them. And your benefits give you a lot. So just to go through it very quickly, we can help not just with work issues, not just with what's going on at work, but also anything that's in your personal life, marital and family counseling, stress, anxiety, or depression, personal emotional challenges, grief or loss, financial or legal problems. Frankly, if it's me, I'll be referring you on with those issues because I probably need help on, well, at least on the financial stuff. But there are some referrals we have for that, and substance abuse or addiction, senior care planning, and what's really awesome is that this is free for you and for your dependents. No costs, no copays. 100% confidential. The only thing when I start something, it's like everything is confidential unless you tell me you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else or elder or child abuse. But other than that, because this is solution focused brief therapy, one of the benefits of that sort of model is that we don't keep records. We don't have to do diagnosis, the treatment plans. We just do a short note to keep us on track when we're in session. So first of all, I hope you guys use the benefit. It's a wonderful benefit, and I'm glad you're here today. Not only can you sign up with individual therapists, but there are these awesome workshops and YouTube webinars. Okay, let's get on to our topic. So boundaries at work. There's some of the trickiest boundaries. I mean, if I think about the importance of boundaries, they're important in all areas of our life to keep us safe and happy. But the trickiest ones, I would say, are the ones that we establish at work, and then of course the ones with our immediate family members and our partners. So we spend about 40,000 hours of our life at work. That's a lot. We spend more time at work than we do with our family members or friends, right? And so feeling comfortable at work, protecting ourselves from burnout, being happy at work, it's a really big part of mental wellness. And of course, workplace, this is especially after COVID, I think there's the stress level has gone up, loneliness has gone up. So they're paying attention to how our well-being at work has never been more important than it is now. Stress, you all know, I don't have to go into all the details, but stress can be too much stress can be really harmful for health. A little bit of stress is actually good for us because it keeps us on our toes. But too much stress is a real problem. And then just a couple of statistics that I got from OSHA from these are quite recent. The Occupational Safety and Health Agency, I think that's what that stands for. So almost 2/3 of US workers say that work has become a significant source of stress. And 83% of workers suffer from work-related stress. At times, it'd be pretty hard not to at sometimes. And that over half say that work-life stress affects their home life, which we don't want that. I like this last one because for every dollar spent on ordinary mental health concerns, employers see a $4 return on productivity gains. So I know that a lot of the companies, including, I focus with Health and Human Services and the state, but a lot of the companies that use Blomquist Hale, they know that this is a really good thing, not only for the community and the culture and because it's the right thing to do, but it's also good for productivity, and it's cost effective to be using things like we're doing today. Okay, so when we go to work, we can't always, let's talk about what happens at work. We can't always choose our coworkers, right? In fact, there's a lot of things we can't choose. Once we choose our partner in life, then there's kind of about a lot of choice in relationships starts to diminish. But so because we spend so much time with our coworkers, we see and we present both the best and the worst of ourselves. And so these are really important relationships, and people aren't always going to show up at the best, and we're not always going to show up at our best because we're there so often. So it's important to know how to navigate being with other people. So what can you do about work stress at work, about burnout, about being your best self? Well, a couple of things. First of all, becoming self-aware. And all of you guys who are showing up, that's part of what you're doing. Self-awareness is key for most things that we take action on. And it's also key for establishing healthy boundaries. Learning communication, communication skills, practicing self-care in all the different ways that you guys have probably talked about it a lot. It doesn't just include pedicures, but it also learning to deal with anxiety, taking time off. Do take your vacation time. I hope you hear that. I hope you hear that. I hope you hear that a lot. And then, of course, what we're going to talk about today is establish healthy boundaries at work. Okay, so what are boundaries? One way of saying what boundaries are that they're the limits and rules we set for ourselves and for our relationships with others so that we can stay safe, happy, and healthy. So again, that they're limits and rules we set for ourselves and for others so that we stay safe, healthy, and happy. I imagine a lot of you are familiar with Brene Brown. She's written some wonderful books, great TED Talks, YouTube videos. She sort of simplified what a boundary is. Basically, it's what's okay and what's not okay. And she also said something else that I want to mention right here. She said that the most empathic and compassionate people are also the most boundaried. I thought that was really interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later in this presentation. So boundaries help us to separate ourselves from other people in a healthy and a positive way. They remind us that we have our feelings and other people have their feelings. So sometimes it's really easy to assume that other people are just like us. And of course, we all share common humanity, and there's so many things that we do have in common with every other human being, but there are also a lot of things that we're very different in, our preferences, the way we think, what works for us, what makes me happy, may not make somebody else happy. Just an example, just because I want to share it right now, is that this morning I was thrilled that it was snowing. So I got up and I went on a hike in the mountains because I love that. I'm kind of weird that way. I love that. Nobody else was there. You bet my husband was definitely not there. He was home, drinking coffee and doing his thing. So that's just a very small example of how we like different things. For me to assume that other people want to go out in the rain and the snow and the mud with me, it isn't that way. So I'm quite different. I'm certainly from my husband, and that's a good thing. So so boundaries let us know that we are not them, and that's in a very positive way, so that we know that we need to we can't expect people to mind read or to know who we are unless we tell them. Okay. So here's another important thing that I wanted to bring up. Sometimes people, when I've worked with people around boundaries, sometimes there's been a little confusion about this, especially I think with couples counseling. Boundaries are not about controlling others. And so, saying, well, say you're in an argument with a partner again, I'm putting up a boundary around this. You can't do this anymore. That doesn't work because boundary, we can't control other people anyway, and that's something that I think we keep reminding ourselves over and over. We can't control other people. We can control us. And then we can state what our boundaries are and what are what we want, what works for us, and what the consequences are if what we're going to do if our boundaries aren't respected. So that's what a boundary is. So, so an example would be, say you have a relative who's a smoker, and they come and visit, and your values are that you don't smoke, and you don't want any smoke in your house. It's not, you don't like the smell, it's unhealthy. So your relative, somebody you really like, comes and they light up a cigarette. So you can't make them not smoke, but you can say, please do not smoke in my house, right? And so hopefully that's the end of it. And if it's not the end of it, you might choose to not invite them in your house. You might go meet them outside, or go meet them somewhere else. But again, it's not about making that other person not smoke. It's about setting your boundary that I'm not okay with your smoking in my house, and I'll take action if you do. I hope that makes sense. So again, setting healthy boundaries is not about controlling what other people can do. Rather, they help you know what you will do. They help you to take care of yourself. They let others know how you want to be treated and what you will do if your boundaries aren't respected. And boundaries aren't just for other people either. Boundaries might be for ourselves as well. So a boundary for self might be, as an example, might be around maybe around not being excessive in consuming alcohol, for an example. And if you have a boundary for yourself that you're not going to have more than one glass of wine at dinner, and you violate that boundary, then you got to figure out then either you have to change your boundary, or you're going to have to figure out what the consequences are for yourself. So it definitely goes both ways. Okay, moving on. So boundaries at work are there are many different areas where you are welcome to and really required to set boundaries. So setting boundaries at work around your physical space. For a lot of us, I know we work online and at remote, but if you work in an office, you might, a boundary might be that you're not interrupted while you're at work. That also has to do with time, which is another one that's down a little bit lower. But so you might not want people to come into your physical space and interrupt you while you're at work. Or you may be somebody who has a bubble. Yeah, I know I have a certain bubble, and if people get a little too close to my face, I start to back up. Because I don't particularly like people being really, really close. We, as a culture, we have different kinds of personal bubbles, and it's important, for us to learn how to let people know what our personal space is. Obviously, sexual boundaries are super important, and that includes touch, any kind of sexual violation, including, of course, harassment. Emotional, how you share and protect your feelings, how you want others to speak to you. This one is a lot of these get a little bit tricky, but the emotional ones, that obviously that you don't allow people to disrespect you, but being something that might feel disrespectful to you might be hilarious to me. And so it's like, how do you feel? Boundaries are to make you feel safe. And if you feel hurt, if you feel if you feel confused and kind of empty or something after an encounter, that's a red flag that somebody has violated your emotional boundary, maybe for no fault of their own. Maybe you haven't established that boundary. Financial, obviously protecting your money and possessions. So being careful who you lend money to, being careful who you lend tools to, or any personal belongings, clothing, whatever. I know, and again, we're different about this. So my husband loves his tools, and he pretty much doesn't lend out his tools because they're very important to him. He loves to, he fixes anything and everything, and his tools are almost like an extension of him, I guess. For me, my stuff isn't. I'm not very attached to tools or stuff, and so it's a lot easier for me to loan out stuff. But those are personal preferences, and we each have a right. He has a perfect right to be a little bit more selective to how he might loan out his tools, and I'm perfectly fine to just let it all go. So who are we? What do we, what's comfortable for us? Time, protecting your time. Again, at work, this is a big one. And so there are lots of things that we could delve into on a much more depth than we're going to have time today. But time, part of time, of course, at work is going to be your workload. So if and I know that workloads really vary depending on where you're working, but if you have a workload, and by the way, its workload is the number one stressor that causes burnout. Too much to do and too little time to do it. And sometimes when you're given work to do, it's very hard to say to let your supervisor or whoever is in charge, whoever is responsible for giving you that work. It's hard to let them know what's appropriate and what you can do and what you can't do. And we're going to talk a little bit about what you might say at that point. But again, boundaries at work especially get tricky, because if you're talking to your boss about your workload, that can be a little scary, because you also want to stay employed, and your financial well-being depends on having a job. And so the balance of all of that gets a little bit trickier than in other relationships. And of course, that also extends to personal relationships, because you can't just decide not to see somebody that you're working with because maybe you don't like them or something like that, or you have personality conflicts. So it definitely gets a little bit trickier for setting up a lot of these boundaries. The last one, beliefs, values, and expectations. These are boundaries that I think we as a society could really learn to manage a little bit better. We are so divided, as we all know right now, politically, especially, and in other arenas. And I think, recognizing that we have our beliefs, and that other people have their beliefs, and that that being respectful of how we talk to other people about our beliefs, and requiring through boundaries that they also be respectful about how they approach us about our beliefs. We tend to get pretty passionate about our beliefs and our values, and that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. And it's also a good thing to question beliefs and values and expectations. But the minute that becomes more of an attack, either way, that we just dig in further. And so setting up boundaries so that we don't ruin relationships, and that we stay open to questioning ourselves. I think that's a really important area that we don't talk about much in society. So, okay. So again, I just wanted to reiterate for a lot of good reasons, and we'll talk about them, setting up boundaries is difficult, because our jobs, we don't want to jeopardize our jobs, and we don't want to jeopardize our relationships, and we're afraid that we're going to hurt people's feelings. I think that's a big one. But ideally, this is ideal. Ideally, as we learn to develop healthy boundaries, we are going to start to grow and learn about ourselves, and to have a more balanced, and I think a healthier lifestyle. Because healthy boundaries, first of all, healthy boundaries require you to understand your own values, beliefs, wants, and needs. If you don't know yourself, you're not going to know what to ask for, right? So having healthy boundaries require a certain amount of self-awareness and introspection. And that's a two-way street. If you recognize that your boundaries are being violated, it's a clue to go back and learn a little bit more about yourself. Healthy boundaries, if you're going to establish healthy boundaries, you're going to know how to communicate your values, beliefs, wants, and needs. So you're going to know what they are and how to communicate them. You're going to be balanced in how much you tell other people about yourself. So you won't overshare or share too little about yourself. Again, it's about safety. And you'll be able to navigate that place of safety. With healthy boundaries, you value your own opinions, because it's okay for you to assert yourself. It's okay for you to ask for what you need and what you want. And you recognize and honor the boundaries of others. So this whole slide is kind of like the ideal. I haven't ever met anybody who is all of that all the time. But it's something that we can grow towards as we learn to establish healthy boundaries. And then that's at work, and anywhere in our lives. So a lot, again, just a lot of what I'm talking about isn't just at work. Obviously, it's in boundaries in all parts of our life. But okay, so here's some ways to check in with yourself, to decide to get a sense of whether you need to maybe establish better or new boundaries in parts of your life. So if a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us are taught to please others, and certainly in early life, when we're little kids, we need to please our parents because they need to take care of us, right? So it's built into our DNA. We're also social creatures. We need relationships. I think there are three things in life, if we just really boil it down to what all humans in all cultures need. One is autonomy. Number two is competence. And number three is connection. And sometimes having all three of them require a bit of a balance, because sometimes autonomy goes against connection, right? So if you can't always make choices and do whatever you want, but that's kind of autonomy, because you're going to ruin connection. So there's that balance. Okay, so enough about that. You may need, if you find that it's difficult to say no to other people because you feel guilty, that's something to explore. Like, where does the guilt come from? That introspection may be challenging the beliefs or the thoughts that it isn't okay to say no. Another signal is if you're getting too involved with other people's problems, or if you notice that you're oversharing personal information and then you start to feel vulnerable. If you're not sure what you need or want, I think, again, a lot of us, as we're growing up, we're not taught, or even we don't feel like we're allowed to make it about us, because we're taught to be kind and generous and compassionate. And so it's about other people. But and that's great, but if we forget ourselves in the process, we start to deal with some depression, anxiety. We start to lose ourselves. So finding that balance. Also, if you dread in certain interactions and feel exhausted afterwards, sometimes you don't know what happened. You're with somebody at work, or something happened in a situation. Somebody said something to you, or you've been interacting and you leave it and going, why do I feel so bad? Why do I feel like I just got a knife stuck in me and I'm not sure what happened? That's a signal that somewhere there was a boundary. Might well be that nobody meant to hurt you, but there's been hurt. And so that's a real signal that step back, see what happened. What do you need to do about it so that doesn't keep happening? Okay, if you have feelings of that others are more important, that feelings of others are more important than your own, having that kind of a belief. Others keep offering unsolicited advice that usually doesn't feel good, and relationships feel one-sided. So those are some little red flags that maybe you need to set up some better boundaries. But some people need to have more flexible boundaries, and that's usually because they've been hurt and wounded in the past, and instead of putting up boundaries that look like a maybe a fence with a gate that you can open and close, because boundaries are flexible, right? So you can open and close them. They're not brick walls. They don't have to be brick walls. So, but sometimes people who have, especially people who've been wounded in the past, they have brick walls as boundaries, keep others at a distance, and they may not, they seem detached even with intimate partners. They have few close relationships and they avoid people, and so they're missing out on that biological piece of connection. And the importance of connection. I mean, the solitary confinement is the worst punishment, other than the capital punishment, right? So this idea that we want to stay connected is huge. Okay, so here are some more reasons of why it's important to set boundaries at work, and in other places in your life. You're going to feel more fulfilled and less exhausted at work. Burnout, if you can help to protect your time, your space, all the other things we talked about, you're going to be more productive and you're going to be happier and you're going to be avoiding burnout. Communicating what we need is one of the kindest things we can do for others and for ourselves. That goes back to the Brene Brown, that what she said, she's one of my heroes, so I keep quoting her, but the most compassionate and empathic people are the most boundaries. When our boundaries are violated, we feel resentment, right? And resentment does not really work with compassion and empathy. So boundaries protect us from feeling resentment towards other people, and that allows us to feel compassionate and empathic. And that's why it's one of the kindest things we can do for others as well as for ourselves. People can't read our mind, and they may not know what we want them to do. And it's obvious, but I think sometimes we forget this. I mean, that's such an obvious statement, but I know that we're all working age people, so we've all been around long enough to know that it's come up in our personal lives. It's like, I thought you knew that about me. Well, if we didn't say it, we can't really hold that other person responsible for not knowing what we want. So when you start to think about boundaries at work, you can set boundaries around your workload, your time at work, your physical space, topics of discussion, your relationships after work, etc. Now that's a big list, and let's talk about it for just a minute. So around your workload, and again, I don't know how many of you are feeling really overwhelmed because there's just too much to do at work, but there are ways to approach it, and it's something that you might want to think about. We might get a chance to practice it later, but if your work is being piled up on you, you may have to have a conversation with your manager, or yourself if you're self-employed, but I think everybody here is probably employed, about, well, if you want me to do this, then I can't do that. How should help me choose? What would you like me to do? Um, so recognizing that it's an option, that you can take your power and you can step back and you can take control of your life. Your time at work. I know that in some settings, there's almost an expectation, especially for people who are remote workers, that they respond to emails and instant messages continuously throughout the day. And maybe that's a way to stay connected. Maybe that's a really important thing, but you don't have to do it right when they pop up. And in fact, we know that getting distracted while we're focused on something at work really interferes with our productivity. That's much more likely to cause us to take work home, which we don't want to do. Um, so there are ways to control your time, and there's some pretty cool time management techniques that can help with this, especially if the expectation is that you do communicate as messages come in. And one of them I want to share right here. It's called the Pomodoro technique. It sounds like tomatoes, but it's after an Italian gentleman. I think his last name was Pomodoro, and you could look it up if you want to. But basically, you schedule yourself. You have a timer, and for 30 minutes or 40. We don't recommend more than about 30 or 40 minutes. You focus on your work. You don't let anybody or anything interrupt you, and you don't let yourself interrupt you either. So no getting up. That's just 30 minutes. You're going to focus on your work, and then after 30 minutes you take a break. So whatever you decide on, depending on your own situation, what the break is like, but maybe a 5-minute break, to go use the restroom, to walk around, to stretch. It's not good for us to be sitting all the time. Maybe a 10-minute break if you're going to be answering emails and instant messages. But it's a way for you to manage your time. Another big one on managing time at work is set the expectation for others through, one of those nice little things at the end of the email, that you're out of the office over weekends and you will respond when you're back. Take care of yourselves through not I guess not allowing other people to expect that you're on 24/7. It's not good for you. There's a great line to think about, which is we teach others how to treat us, right? We teach other people how to treat us, and boundaries are the way that we teach others how to treat us. And so with time management, that's such a big part of work. And so I hope, really take that seriously in your lives. For those of you who, who do work at home, hopefully you have a set place that's separate from the rest of your house. You leave your computer, you leave your work phone there. When you're done with work, you shut it all off. Maybe you have to share the space to do other things, but the work things are off, and you keep that boundary for yourself. Sometimes I think that the time boundary, the person who has the hardest time with following the boundary we set for ourselves is us, because we get curious about work. It's like, what happened? And so that's where you might want to really look at yourself and focus on a little, working up a little self-discipline about how you use your time for yourself and expectations for others. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Your physical space, again, we've talked about that. People have different bubbles. Some people like to be hugged. A lot of people don't like to be hugged unless they really know the other person. And it's okay to, it's necessary. It's, that's, let people know what's comfortable for you. Topics of discussion, it's having a friend at work, water cooler conversations. That's all really healthy for workplace. One of some of the research that I was looking at, having a best friend at work is one of the top factors that make people happy at work. Of course, there are some complicated things about that, especially if somebody gets promoted, or if conflict happens, or if you fall in love with each other. So there's a little danger involved with having a best friend at work. But definitely, topics of discussion, getting to know each other. You want to, depending on who you are, you definitely want to connect with other people at work within the boundaries of what makes you comfortable and what works for you. And I know that some people don't want to have any personal information about them shared at work. That's okay. Other people are a little bit more of an open book. That's okay also. But it's something that you need to navigate with yourself and with your coworkers. The last one, your relationships after work. Forced fun isn't so great. And so that's sort of a funny thing to say, because I know sometimes companies put up they do like sort of building teamwork, and they have activities, and that can be also a really good thing to do, but again, that's an area where you have choice to navigate. You have choice, that autonomy piece. You do have choice to navigate that. And maybe some of your coworkers like to go out to nightclubs, or they like to go to concerts, or they like to do things that you don't feel so comfortable with, but maybe you'd like to go on a walk with them. So you don't have to just say, no to everything. You get to choose what's comfortable for you. Again, it goes back to reflecting on your values, your wants, your needs. Okay, so let's talk about, why is it so tricky to set boundaries? Well, here's a good list of them. So fear of rejection. Again, we are social beings, and we've also been taught early on that we need to get along with each other. I mean, that's I guess we're I don't know that we're really Homo sapiens, like wise people, right? But I think we are Homo cooperans, much more that, because of the reason that we rule the planet is because we learn to cooperate with each other. So then when we set up a boundary, sometimes it feels like that it goes against that desire, and that I think it's in our DNA, that innate desire and need to please others, and we really don't want to be rejected. Relationships are so important to us. Fear of not being appreciated. So and I guess we all want to feel important. We want to feel valued by other people. And sometimes when we put up a boundary, other people don't always like it. There is a risk to putting up boundaries, and people may judge you. I don't think I put that one up, but that under others, I would add fear of being judged, and I wouldn't like that. So fear of not being appreciated, fear of not being judged. For a lot of us, self-esteem is based on external validation from other people. So we tend to have something that's called a outer locus of control. We respond to what others want of us. It's something that we've been taught, that we've learned. It's probably ways that we stayed safe. Again, boundaries are all about safety, that we stayed safe at maybe when we were younger, or at other times in our lives, that the way to stay safe was what other people wanted us to do. But now that we're adults and self-sufficient, it is healthy for us to learn to develop an internal locus of control, so that we are not so dependent on the judgment and the desires of other people. But that takes time. I think that there's often a growth pattern of as people mature from an external locus of control to an internal locus of control. Okay, so another reason that it's hard to establish boundaries at work is because we want to be a team player. And if we don't look like a team player, that can jeopardize our well-being at work. So that it's so, so these are all things that make it harder. We don't want to disappoint other people. We don't want to we're afraid of looking poorly. We're worried of reprisal. When you put up a boundary, it's saying no to other people. And sometimes, the whole thing about boundaries is to keep us safe, but sometimes but we also don't want people to react to us. And then, of course, a desire to please. So boundaries are fences and not walls. I mentioned that earlier. So how do we set up boundaries? And when you, just to reiterate, when you do set up a boundary, you can change them. You can change them. And you can open them, you can close them, you can, once you set up a boundary, you can change it, but it's something you want to do intentionally. Okay, so setting up boundaries. Number one, communicate effectively. And I use language that is honest, direct, respectful, and timely. Really love these 4 points of good communication skills. I think most of us are taught how to do I statements, but we're not always taught. And I know that I wasn't really often aware of the importance, especially of the timely piece. So when you're sometimes we can plan on setting a boundary and not just be reactive in the first place, which that's a really nice way to be able to set a boundary. So think it through and come from a place of being honest, direct, respectful, and timely. Be clear so that others will know exactly what your limit is. So like going back to that, the smoking example, if your relative smokes in your house, then the limit is that they have to leave the house. If they light up, they have to get out of the house. If they keep doing it, maybe you start meeting somewhere else. Be clear. You don't necessarily have to explain why you're setting up a boundary. That's up to you. Sometimes it's useful, but sometimes it's personal. It's not required to tell people why. In the beginning, use gentle language if possible, because you want to protect relationships. But if that doesn't work, and you're feeling threatened, then you need to use firmer language. If possible, and I mentioned this earlier, take your time on how you want to word a boundary. You might want to write it down. You might want to practice, especially if this is something that you're worried about how the other person is going to react. So think about, be intentional, think about how you want to word a boundary, and then practice it if you can. And then the hard part is being consistent. And this really is the hard part, because if you establish a boundary and somebody violates your boundary, what are you teaching them? Going back to that, we teach people how to treat us. You're teaching them that you didn't mean it. So the consistent part is really difficult. And at the same time, if you're not consistent, because most of us fail at this at times, be gentle with yourself, reassess. You might need to restate it. You might need to go back. But do really focus on that consistent part. Okay, so just to kind of summarize, you want to build up boundaries slowly. If this is new practice for you, start slow. Don't overwhelm yourself. Where's the most important part in your life right now at work or in other parts? Where are you leaking energy? Where is your well-being where's it not being met? Start with that. Go slow. When you can, set them up early in a relationship. So if you're new at your job, this is a great time to teach people how to treat you. It's harder, but not impossible to go back and be retroactive. And it's probably really good practice. And then, of course, consistency. Set up boundaries you can enforce, and do enforce them when your boundaries are violated. There's so many tricky parts to this. That's the most tricky, I think. So this is another way to summarize the minimum effective dose. In the beginning, because you do want to protect relationships. So in the beginning, just use gentle language. What do you need to tell somebody so that they'll respect your boundary? If that doesn't work, restate your boundary. If that doesn't work, you might add more information about exactly what you mean by your boundary. Maybe you were clear enough. And then if that doesn't work, explain the consequences. When you set up a boundary, you don't always have to say, if you don't, I will. Sometimes that's going overboard in the beginning, but if your boundaries are violated, then you need to set the consequences. And of course, then there's some other areas where you do need to set the consequences right away, so that there's no hard and fast rule there. And then, of course, the last is to enforce the boundaries. So it's hard, but you can do it because it's better for everybody. And gosh, we're just about out of time, but I do have some questions that I wanted to put up for practice. And maybe these are things that you can think about for how would you set up, do a what if with yourself. What would you do? What would you do if a coworker starts to gossip about someone else? How would you approach them? And it could be something like as easy as like, makes me feel really uncomfortable when we're talking about so-and-so. And of course, we don't, it's obvious if they're gossiping about the other person, they're probably gossiping about you too. So you're doing them a favor to let them know that that's not a good culture. And that is my timer, that we're 10 minutes, 10 minutes to the hour, which is about when we start to, when we're stopping. So Heather, are you there?
Yeah. So we've had a question come in. She said, what are some steps to enforce a boundary?
The steps to, so there's a book that I really enjoyed by Melissa Urban called Boundaries, Setting the Limits That Set You Free. And she talks about it in there. And she talks about green light, yellow light, red light, and enforcing a boundary. And the green light is if you're just sort of, if your boundary's been violated, but it's not, you're not feeling terribly uncomfortable, you didn't get scared or whatever, just a reminder, hey, by the way, that makes me feel really uncomfortable when you do that. Just as a reminder. The yellow light would be, we've talked about this before, and when you talk about other people, it makes me think that you're also going to be talking about me, and that makes me not want to hang out with you. And I really value our friendship. I really want to keep being together, but it doesn't work for me when you talk about other people. That would be yellow light. Red light would be, you know what, I'm going to end this conversation right now and I'm leaving. So that's a way to think about different, depends on what the boundary is, but I kind of like that way of looking at green, yellow, red for enforcing boundaries. I hope that's helpful.
And then someone said, what was that book called again?
Oh, it was by, I think it's on my, let me see if it's on my last page, because here it is. Melissa Urban, The Book of Boundaries, Set the Limits That Will Set You Free. I thought it was really good. And then there's a really nice TED Talk also that I used for this, was by Boundaries at Work with Nedra Glover. She's good, and she's got nice little animated things. So it's only like 12 minutes or something.